a lot of students come in with relationship issues. And so relationship issues, that could be anything from relationship issues with their parents. Oftentimes, some of the students who come in, I would say, have a really conflictual relationships with their parents, and especially, I would say, undergraduate students oftentimes are kind of negotiating power and autonomy in those relationships, because a lot of parents, I think, have difficulty of the idea of their children, who are no longer children now, actually, that are young adults, kind of growing up and being self-sufficient and kind of achieving on their own outside the house. I think that's difficult for some parents. And so I have some students who are talking about this idea of they really want kind of a more equal relationship with their parents, or maybe not equal, but at least wanting to be respected and seen as adults. And that's not always the case. So that's one sort of relationship issue we see. There's also a lot of romantic relationship issues. So people kind of in their first romantic relationships, and there's a huge amount of emotion that gets stirred up in our first romantic relationships. And especially when those come to an end, people often come into the counseling center. So sometimes it's that they have been doing a long distance relationship with somebody that they were dating in high school or from a previous college, and when they've come to UCLA, they've sometimes decided to end that relationship just because of the distance. Sometimes they're dating people who are also at UCLA, and there's been some rupture in that relationship. And I would say the norm is that people become really sad. And they come in thinking that there's something wrong, or that, so they come in because they're suffering. But I hear oftentimes people saying, like, my reaction is too strong, or I'm having an emotional breakdown. And when I dig into what that is a little bit, sometimes I'll find that people say, well, I cried. And so I do, I guess, a lot of normalizing around this idea that that relationships, and especially romantic relationships, are intensely emotional, and there's these feelings of connection that get stirred up that are really primal, and that when there's a rupture in the relationship, that a strong sadness and a strong emotional reaction, it could be anger, it could be whatever it is, anxiety about not finding somebody else, that's really to be expected, and kind of just helping them to accept their own emotional experience instead of labeling breaking down and crying, or becoming angry or agitated, or even, having difficulty sleeping immediately after a breakup, that's not abnormal. It's not that, they shouldn't come in and talk to somebody about it, because of course there's a lot of emotions coming up and it can really help, but just not to blame themselves for having an emotional experience, and to let go of this idea that they should be kind of stoic and able to kind of immediately move on with their lives. So sometimes there's this kind of slowing down and helping them to really be in touch with what their emotional experience is and the feelings that come up for them. And one thing I tell people a lot, because they don't want to feel their feelings, is that if suppressing your feelings worked, I might be able to consider that with them as a possible option, but it just doesn't. As people, as human beings, we're really bad at suppressing our emotions, and they tend to come out in other ways, whether it's physical illness or aggression in other relationships, that they don't go away nicely. And so taking that as a given, a lot of the work is about helping them to notice their emotions, to be in their emotional experience when they feel it, and to still do the things they need to take care of themselves so that they can come out the other side. But I really have to work with people sometimes around accepting that having an emotional experience is not a bad thing in and of itself, even though it's uncomfortable sometimes. And with that, I guess aside from the emotions is kind of the thoughts piece that we're talking about with voices. And so people have a lot of self-critical thoughts around relationships, both when they're in relationships, but especially when relationships end, about was there something I did or could have done? Am I making the right choices? Am I going to be able to find another person who's going to be attracted to me in that same way? And so, similarly, I'll do a lot of work with people around kind of just acknowledging the thoughts that are coming up. Because similarly with the emotions, people try to push away the thoughts and like, I'm trying to go to sleep. I'm just going to force that thought of my ex-girlfriend out of my head. And again, that doesn't work. That when we try to push away thoughts and suppress thoughts, they tend to come up more strongly, and it's really difficult. And so sometimes I'll do some even experiential exercises around having people try to suppress a thought, like just picking a random thought. This comes from more kind of like acceptance and commitment therapy approaches to, but if you have people try not to think of a white elephant for 30 seconds, that's all they think about, right? And so this kind of demonstrating to people that this thought suppression is not effective, and then talking to them about other ways of relating to their thoughts. So things like just acknowledging their thoughts when they're there, being kind of mindful of the thoughts, and then if it's a thought that's very distressing and it keeps recurring, like allowing yourself to bring your focus back to whatever's going on in your life right now, whether it's your schoolwork or even just what you're doing in that moment, as kind of giving yourself a relief from the thought, not unnecessarily ruminating about it and obsessing about it, but just acknowledging like, oh, I'm having that thought about my ex again, and I'm going to bring myself back to my studies because that's what I'm doing now, and oh, there's the thought again. And instead of like, I shouldn't be thinking about my ex, which tends to make studying kind of obsolete and that's all you're going to think about, just acknowledging like that's probably going to come up for a while, it's probably going to bring with it strong emotions, and that's going to be the case for some time. And actually, the more that I approach it and am able to kind of do some processing and self-exploration around what those feelings are in me that brings up, the less power it's going to have over me, and the more I'm going to be able to kind of heal and move on to whatever the next phase is.